The autumn fog had settled over London like a shroud when Mrs. Helena Ashworth arrived at Baker Street in a state of desperate confusion, clutching a torn photograph and a child's hair ribbon, bringing with her a mystery that would prove to be one of the most perplexing disappearance cases Sherlock Holmes ever investigated. Holmes, who had been studying recent patterns of missing persons cases across London, work that would prove remarkably relevant to our investigation, looked up with immediate interest as our distraught visitor entered. Mrs. Ashworth was perhaps 40 years old, well-dressed in mourning attire, her face pale with worry and exhaustion, her hands trembling as she placed the photograph and ribbon on Holmes's desk with careful reverence. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice breaking with emotion. "My children's governess, Miss Eleanor Hartley, has vanished. But that's not the truly impossible part of this nightmare. You see, this is the second time Miss Hartley has vanished from my household. The first time was 3 years ago. She disappeared without explanation, leaving my children devastated and my home in chaos. Then, 6 months ago, she returned just as mysteriously as she'd left, offering no explanation for her absence, asking only to resume her position. Against my better judgment, I agreed, because my children adored her and she was an exceptional governess. But now she's vanished again, exactly the same way, leaving in the middle of the night with no note, no warning, taking nothing but the clothes she wore. It's as if the same impossible disappearance has repeated itself, and I need to know why. Before I continue with this most perplexing case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let us proceed with the baffling mystery of the governess who vanished twice. Holmes studied the photograph Mrs. Ashworth had brought. It showed a young woman of perhaps 28 years, with gentle features, intelligent eyes, and a warm smile as she stood with 2 children in what appeared to be a garden setting. "Tell me about Miss Hartley," Holmes said. "How did she first come to work for your family?" "She answered an advertisement I placed 4 years ago," Mrs. Ashworth explained. "I was seeking a governess for my 2 children, Emma, then 6 years old, and Thomas, then 4. My husband had recently passed away, leaving me to raise the children alone, and I needed someone educated, patient, and trustworthy. Miss Hartley's credentials were impeccable. She had references from 2 prominent families, excellent education, including French and music, and when I interviewed her, she seemed perfect for the position. The children took to her immediately, which was remarkable because Emma had been quite difficult with previous governesses." "What were these references?" Holmes asked. "Do you still have the letters?" Mrs. Ashworth produced several documents from her reticule. "Here are the original reference letters from when she first applied. The family spoke very highly of her work, claimed she was devoted, skilled, and had positive influence on the children in her care." Holmes examined the letters with his magnifying glass, studying not just the content, but the paper quality, ink, handwriting, and other physical characteristics. After several minutes of intense scrutiny, he set them aside with a thoughtful expression. "These references are genuine," he said. "The families mentioned actually exist. The signatures match other correspondence I'm familiar with from those households, and the descriptions are detailed enough to suggest authentic experience with Miss Hartley's work. So we can eliminate the possibility that she obtained her position through fraudulent credentials. She worked for us for nearly a year, Mrs. Ashworth continued. That first year was wonderful. The children thrived under her instruction. The household ran smoothly, and I felt I could finally focus on managing my late husband's business affairs, knowing Emma and Thomas were in capable hands. Miss Hartley was more than an employee. She became part of our family. That's why her first disappearance was so shocking and hurtful. Describe the circumstances of that first vanishing, Holmes instructed. It was a Tuesday evening in October, 3 years ago. Miss Hartley had conducted the children's lessons as usual, supervised their dinner, read them bedtime stories, and retired to her room around 9 o'clock, her typical schedule. The next morning, when she didn't appear at breakfast time, I went to check on her and found her room empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. Her nightclothes were still folded on the pillow, but the day dress she'd been wearing the previous evening was gone. So were her coat and boots. Everything else. Her other clothing, her personal books, her hairbrush, even the wages I'd paid her just 2 days earlier, remained in her room untouched. Did anyone hear her leave during the night? I asked. No one heard anything. The servants were all asleep in their quarters, and my bedroom is on the opposite side of the house from the governess's room. If Miss Hartley left quietly, she could have done so without waking anyone. But why would she leave so suddenly, in the middle of the night, taking nothing with her except the clothes she wore? Did you contact the police at the time? Holmes inquired. Yes, immediately. They investigated, but found no trace of Miss Hartley. No one had seen her leave the house. No one had seen her in the neighborhood that night or the following days. She had simply vanished. The police eventually concluded she must have had some personal crisis that caused her to flee, though they acknowledged the circumstances were strange. And what did your household staff say about Miss Hartley's behavior in the days before this first disappearance? Holmes asked. Was there any indication she was planning to leave? Mrs. Ashworth shook her head. That's what made it so incomprehensible. The day before she vanished, Miss Hartley had been planning the children's lessons for the following week. She'd asked me to order certain educational materials from a bookseller. She'd mentioned looking forward to taking the children to the museum the next month. There was absolutely no indication she intended to leave. Quite the opposite. Everything she said and did suggested she planned to remain with us indefinitely. Tell me about her return 6 months ago, Holmes said, leaning forward with keen interest. It was a Saturday afternoon. I heard the doorbell, answered it myself because the servants were occupied, and there stood Miss Hartley, looking older, thinner, but unmistakably the same woman who had vanished 3 years earlier. She said simply, "Mrs. Ashworth, I've come to ask if my position is still available. I know I left without explanation, and you have every reason to turn me away, but I would be grateful for the opportunity to return to your household and resume caring for Emma and Thomas." "And you agreed?" I asked, surprised. Not immediately. I was shocked, angry, confused. I demanded to know where she'd been, why she'd left so suddenly, what had happened during those 3 years. But Miss Hartley refused to explain. She said only that she'd had to leave for reasons she couldn't discuss, that she regretted the pain her departure had caused, and that she hoped to make amends by returning to her duties if I would permit it. Most people would have refused such a request, Holmes observed. I should have, Mrs. Ashworth admitted, but the children had never fully adjusted to the governesses who came after Miss Hartley. Emma, in particular, had become withdrawn and difficult. When Miss Hartley stood at my door, I thought about how much the children had loved her, how well they'd done under her care. and I made the decision to give her another chance. I told her she could return on a trial basis, but that if she ever planned to leave again, she must give proper notice. No more mysterious disappearances. "And how did this second period of employment proceed?" Holmes asked. "Remarkably well at first. The children were overjoyed to have Miss Hartley back. Emma's difficult behaviour vanished overnight. Thomas, who barely remembered her from 3 years ago, quickly came to adore her, just as his sister did. For 6 months, everything was perfect, even better than the first time. Miss Hartley was attentive, skilled, devoted. She helped Emma with increasingly advanced studies, encouraged Thomas's interest in natural sciences, and once again became an integral part of our household. Until she vanished again," Holmes said. "Until 3 nights ago," Mrs. Ashworth confirmed, her voice trembling. "The exact same pattern. She conducted the children's evening routine, retired to her room at her usual time, and by morning had disappeared. Same circumstances. Bed not slept in, night clothes folded, day dress and coat gone, everything else left behind. But this time, she also left something she hadn't left before." Mrs. Ashworth gestured to the items she'd brought, the torn photograph and the hair ribbon. The photograph was torn in half and left on her pillow. "It's from this summer. Shows Miss Hartley with the children during a holiday we took to the countryside. And the hair ribbon belonged to Emma. It was her favourite, and Miss Hartley knew that. Why would she tear the photograph and leave Emma's ribbon, unless she was trying to send some kind of message?" Holmes examined both items carefully. The photograph had been torn cleanly down the middle, separating Miss Hartley's image from the children's. The hair ribbon was pale blue silk, showing signs of frequent wear, but carefully maintained. "Mrs. Ashworth, I need to examine Miss Hartley's room and interview your household staff," Holmes said decisively. "This pattern of disappearance suggests either deeply personal psychological crisis that recurs in cycles, or some external force compelling her to leave repeatedly. The torn photograph and ribbon indicate intentional communication. She's trying to tell you something she cannot or will not say directly. We must discover what circumstances would cause a devoted governess to abandon children she clearly cares for, not once, but twice." Within the hour, Holmes and I were at the Ashworth residence in Bloomsbury, a substantial townhouse that spoke of comfortable, upper-middle-class prosperity. Mrs. Ashworth showed us immediately to Miss Hartley's room on the 3rd floor, a modest but comfortable space with a narrow bed, writing desk, wardrobe, and bookshelf. Holmes began his examination with characteristic thoroughness, studying every inch of the room. He examined the wardrobe, where Miss Hartley's remaining clothes hung neatly, inspected the books on her shelf, mostly educational texts and classic literature, and carefully went through the writing desk where she kept correspondence and personal papers. "She's an avid letter writer," Holmes observed, examining several partially completed letters in the desk drawer. Or rather, was. Look at these, Watson. Letters begun but never finished, addressed to various people but never sent. Each letter starts warmly, discussing her work with the children and expressing contentment with her position, but then stops abruptly mid-sentence, as if she suddenly couldn't continue. I examined the unfinished letters. Each showed the same pattern. Several paragraphs of pleasant correspondence, then an abrupt cessation. often in the middle of describing some aspect of her daily life with the Ashworth family. It's as if she wants to maintain connections with people from her past, I observed. But something prevents her
from actually completing and sending the letters. The pattern suggests internal conflict, desire to communicate versus inability or unwillingness to do so.
Holmes had moved to the small window overlooking the street. Notice the view from this room. Miss Hartley could see anyone approaching the house from this vantage point. If she was watching for someone, either hoping they would come or fearing they might, this window would allow her to monitor the street below. He examined the windowsill carefully with his magnifying glass. There were wear marks here, suggesting she stood at this window frequently, perhaps for extended periods. The wood is slightly worn where hands would rest while looking out. Holmes turned his attention to the space beneath the bed, getting down on hands and knees to peer into the shadows. "Aha," he said with satisfaction, reaching under and pulling out a small wooden box. Hidden, but not well hidden. Perhaps she wanted it found eventually. The box was unlocked. Inside were several items: a pressed flower, a theatre ticket stub dated 2 years before Miss Hartley first came to the Ashworth household, a sketch of a young man's face, and most intriguingly, a folded newspaper clipping. Holmes unfolded the clipping carefully. It was from a newspaper dated 4 years ago, just before Miss Hartley took her position with the Ashworths. The article reported the death of a young clerk named Thomas Hartley, killed in an accident at the docks. The death had been ruled accidental. He'd been crushed by falling cargo while working in a warehouse. "Hartley," I said. "The same surname as our missing governess. A relative. Possibly her husband, given the sketch and the pressed flower. Tokens of romantic attachment," Holmes suggested. But look at the timing. Thomas Hartley died 4 years ago, and shortly afterward, Eleanor Hartley, if that's even her real name, took a position as governess with the Ashworths. She would have been in mourning, seeking a new life after losing her husband. But that doesn't explain why she would vanish twice, I pointed out. No, Holmes agreed. But it suggests she's been running from something, or hiding from someone, since before she ever came to this household. We need to learn more about Thomas Hartley's death, and whether there were any unusual circumstances the newspaper report didn't mention. Holmes interviewed the Ashworth household staff, the cook, 2 housemaids, and the footman. Each confirmed that Miss Hartley had been a quiet, devoted employee who seemed genuinely fond of the children. None had noticed anything unusual about her behaviour before either disappearance. Though, the cook said thoughtfully, there was something odd on the evening before she vanished the first time. A man came to the servants' entrance asking for her. Said he had a message. Miss Hartley went white as a sheet when I told her someone was asking for her. She went down to speak with him, was gone perhaps 10 minutes, and came back looking terribly shaken. Wouldn't say what the message was or who the man was. "Can you describe this man?" Holmes asked intently. Tall fellow, thin, wearing working-class clothes but walking like someone who was used to better station. Had a scar on his right cheek. I noticed it particular because it looked like a knife wound. rather than an accident scar. He had dark hair, going grey at the temples, maybe 45 or 50 years old. And before this most recent disappearance, did anyone come asking for Miss Hartley? The cook shook her head. No one I saw. But then, if someone came late at night after we'd all gone to bed, we wouldn't know about it, would we? Holmes also interviewed the children, Emma and Thomas, now 10 and 8 years old respectively. Both were distraught about Miss Hartley's disappearance. She promised she wouldn't leave again, Emma said tearfully. When she came back 6 months ago, I told her I'd missed her terribly, and she promised she'd never leave like that again. She said she would always stay with us unless something impossible happened. I asked her what could be impossible enough to make her go away, and she said she hoped I'd never have to understand. Did Miss Hartley ever seem frightened? Holmes asked gently. Did she ever act as if she was worried about something? Emma considered carefully. Sometimes she would get very quiet and sad, especially when we did lessons about families and homes. Once we were reading a story about a mother and father with children, and Miss Hartley started crying. She said she was sorry, that the story reminded her of something she'd lost, but she wouldn't explain what she meant. Young Thomas added, Miss Hartley used to check the windows and doors at night before going to bed. She'd make sure everything was locked tight, even in summer when it was hot. I asked her why, and she said it was important to keep bad things outside, where they belonged. After completing his investigation of the Ashworth household, Holmes returned to Baker Street and immediately began researching Thomas Hartley's death 4 years earlier. What should have been a straightforward accidental death case revealed itself to be considerably more complex upon deeper investigation. Thomas Hartley had worked as a clerk at a shipping firm called Brennan & Sons, handling cargo manifests and warehouse inventory. On the day of his death, he'd been in the warehouse checking on a shipment when a stack of crates had supposedly fallen, crushing him. The death was witnessed by 2 other warehouse workers who claimed they'd been across the room when the accident occurred. But Holmes discovered something the police investigation had missed. Thomas Hartley had gone to his supervisor 3 days before his death, claiming he'd found discrepancies in the cargo records. Valuable goods were listed on manifests, but never appeared in the warehouse, suggesting systematic theft. Hartley had been preparing a detailed report documenting the missing items when he died. The accident was no accident, Holmes concluded. Hartley discovered theft from the warehouse, likely a conspiracy involving multiple employees. He was killed to prevent him from exposing the operation, and his death was staged to look accidental. And his widow? I asked. If Eleanor Hartley was Thomas's wife, she would have been in danger if the conspirators thought she knew what her husband had discovered, which would explain why she took a position as a governess under her maiden name, or perhaps using her married name but hiding her connection to the murdered clerk, Holmes said. She was hiding from whoever killed her husband, creating a new identity and a new life where they wouldn't find her. But they found her anyway, I said. 3 years ago, that man with the scar came asking for her. Probably someone involved in the warehouse conspiracy, either threatening her to keep silent or
trying to determine what she knew about her husband's investigation. And she fled rather than risk the same fate as her husband, Holmes continued. The first disappearance was an emergency escape from immediate danger. But why would she return after 3 years? And why disappear again now? Holmes spent the next several days tracing Eleanor Hartley's movements during the 3 years between her first disappearance and her return to the Ashworth household. Through his network of informants and careful examination of records, he discovered that she had been living in Edinburgh under yet another assumed name, working as a seamstress in a modest shop. She stayed hidden for 3 years, Holmes told me, living quietly, avoiding attention, presumably believing enough time had passed that the conspirators who killed her husband would have forgotten about her or moved on to other concerns. That's why she felt safe returning to the Ashworths. She missed the children, wanted to resume her career as a governess, and thought the danger had passed. But it hadn't, I said. No, someone was still watching for her, still tracking her movements. When she returned to the Ashworth household and resumed using her real name, or the name she'd been using as a governess, she exposed herself to discovery. The conspirators learned she was back in London, and she had to flee again. Holmes's investigation into Brennan & Sons revealed that the shipping firm had undergone significant changes in the 4 years since Thomas Hartley's death. The original owners had sold the company to new investors. Several warehouse workers had been dismissed for theft, and there had been a general house cleaning of operations. The theft conspiracy that Hartley had discovered appeared to have been exposed and dismantled, though too late to save his life. But if the conspiracy was broken up, why would Eleanor still be in danger? I asked. Because, Holmes said grimly, not everyone involved was caught. The police focused on the warehouse workers who were actually stealing cargo, the visible criminals. But someone at a higher level was organizing the operation, someone who ordered Thomas Hartley's death to protect the scheme. That person was never identified, never arrested, never exposed. Holmes obtained the police file on the warehouse theft investigation. Among the documents was a list of suspected conspirators, warehouse workers, shipping clerks, dock handlers. Most had been arrested and convicted, but one name on the suspect list had never been apprehended. A warehouse supervisor named Malcolm Brennan, nephew of the firm's original owner, who had disappeared shortly after the investigation began. Malcolm Brennan organized the theft operation and ordered Thomas Hartley killed when he discovered it, Holmes explained. When the police began investigating, Brennan fled before he could be arrested. He's been in hiding for 4 years, but he knows that Eleanor, Hartley, Thomas's widow, is a threat to him. If she ever came forward with information about what her husband discovered, it could lead police back to Brennan. So Brennan has been hunting her, I said, understanding dawning. He found her 3 years ago, forcing her to flee. She hid for 3 years, thought it was safe to return, but Brennan found her again. And now she's vanished a second time, once again running for her life, Holmes confirmed. The question is, where would she go this time? After 2 disappearances, after years of hiding, where could Eleanor Hartley feel safe? Holmes stared at the items Eleanor had left behind, the torn photograph and Emma's hair ribbon. These weren't left by accident. She's communicating something. But what? He examined the torn photograph again. She tore herself away from the children, literally separating her image from theirs. A message that she must stay away to keep them safe. The ribbon belonged to Emma, I added. Her favourite ribbon, which Eleanor would have known. Taking it and leaving it behind. Perhaps saying goodbye. Or, Holmes said slowly, indicating where she's gone. Emma's ribbon. Emma's favourite colour. Pale blue. What if Eleanor is telling us she's gone somewhere connected to Emma? Holmes turned to Mrs. Ashworth. You mentioned taking a holiday to the countryside this summer when this photograph was taken. Where did you go? To Sussex, Mrs. Ashworth replied. A small village called Alderworth. We rented the cottage for 2 weeks. The children loved it. There was a stream where they could play, woods to explore. Miss Hartley seemed happier there than I'd ever seen her in London. Alderworth, Holmes repeated. Did Miss Hartley have any particular connection to that village? She mentioned once that she'd visited there as a child, that it reminded her of happier times before her life became complicated. I think returning there this summer brought back pleasant memories. Holmes stood decisively. Watson, we're going to Alderworth. If Eleanor Hartley is running from danger and wants to feel safe, she might return to a place associated with happiness and childhood innocence. And if she's trying to communicate her destination through the torn photograph taken in that location, Alderworth is where we'll find her. The journey to Sussex took most of the following day. Alderworth proved to be a small village nestled in gently rolling countryside, with perhaps 200 residents, a single inn, a church, and a handful of shops. The cottage where the Ashworth family had stayed was at the edge of the village, overlooking a meadow with a stream running through it. Holmes began inquiring in the village about whether anyone had seen a woman matching Eleanor Hartley's description. At first, no one recalled seeing such a visitor, but at the village inn, the proprietor remembered something useful. There was a woman came through 3 days ago, the innkeeper said, arrived on the evening coach, looked tired and worried, asked if there were any cottages available for rent. I told her old Mrs. Whitmore's cottage at the edge of the woods was empty. Mrs. Whitmore passed away 2 months back, and her family hasn't decided what to do with the property yet. The woman asked how to get there, and I gave her directions. Haven't seen her since, but then that cottage is quite isolated. Following the innkeeper's directions, Holmes and I made our way through the village and along a narrow path into the woods. After perhaps 20 minutes of walking, we came upon a small stone cottage set in a clearing, surrounded by overgrown gardens. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating occupancy. Holmes approached the door and knocked firmly. Miss Hartley, this is Sherlock Holmes. I've been engaged by Mrs. Ashworth to find you. I'm not here to force your return, but I need to understand what danger you're facing so I can help protect you and the Ashworth family. Silence followed his announcement. Then, slowly, the door opened to reveal a thin, exhausted-looking woman in her early 30s. Unmistakably the same face from the photograph Mrs. Ashworth had shown us. Mr. Holmes, Eleanor Hartley said wearily. I knew someone would eventually track me here.
I'd hoped I had more time before having to run again. You don't need to run, Holmes said gently. But I need you to tell me the truth about why you've been hiding, who you're hiding from, and what happened to your husband 4 years ago. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped back to allow us entry. The cottage interior was sparse but clean, with basic furniture and signs of recent habitation. Eleanor gestured for us to sit, then took a seat herself, her hands folded nervously in her lap. My name is Eleanor Hartley, she began. Thomas Hartley was my husband. We married 6 years ago. We were both young, in love, building a life together. Thomas worked as a clerk at Brennan & Sons, and I worked as a governess for a family in Chelsea. We were happy, planning for the future, hoping to start a family of our own someday. Then 4 years ago, Thomas came home one evening very agitated. He told me he'd discovered something wrong at the warehouse. Valuable cargo was disappearing from the manifests. Goods that should have been in inventory couldn't be accounted for. He'd been documenting the discrepancies, preparing to report the theft to the firm's owners. 3 days later, he was killed in what they called an accident. Eleanor's voice broke. But I knew it wasn't an accident. Thomas had told me he was being watched, that someone at the warehouse had warned him to stop asking questions about the missing cargo. When I heard about his death, I knew immediately that he'd been murdered. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. I was terrified, Eleanor admitted. Thomas had told me that someone very high up in the company was involved in the theft. Someone with enough power to order his death and make it look accidental. I didn't know who to trust. If I went to the police with accusations, the conspirators might kill me too before I could testify. So I did the only thing I could think of. I disappeared. You took a position as governess with the Ashworth family, Holmes said. Yes, I used my maiden name. Eleanor Hartley was my married name, but Eleanor Wright was my birth name. I thought if I became a different person, started a new life, the people who killed Thomas would never find me. And for nearly a year, it worked. I was safe. I was rebuilding my life, and the Ashworth children gave me reason to feel joy again. Until the man with the scar came asking for you, Holmes prompted. Eleanor's face went pale. Malcolm Brennan. He was the one who organized the theft operation, the one who ordered Thomas killed. I recognized him immediately. I'd seen him once when I visited Thomas at the warehouse, and I'd never forgotten his face. When he came to the Ashworth house asking for me, I knew I'd been found. I didn't even wait to hear what he wanted. I fled that very night, leaving everything behind. Where did you go? To Edinburgh. I changed my name again, worked as a seamstress, lived in a tiny room in a poor neighbourhood where no one asked questions. I stayed there for 3 years, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid Brennan would find me again. But eventually, I convinced myself that enough time had passed. The police had arrested many of the warehouse thieves by then. I thought perhaps Brennan had given up looking for me, that he'd fled the country or been caught. I missed my work as a governess, missed the Ashworth children desperately, and I decided to risk returning. Which exposed you to discovery again, Holmes said. I was careful at first. I returned to London quietly, sent Mrs. Ashworth a letter, asking if my position was available. Used my old name because that's who the Ashworths knew me as.
I thought I was being cautious, but someone must have been watching the Ashworth house, or perhaps Brennan had informants monitoring for any mention of Eleanor Hartley. However he found out, within months of my return, I began noticing signs that I was being watched. Someone following me when I took the children for walks, a man loitering across the street from the house, faces that appeared too often to be coincidence. 3 nights ago, I received a message, slipped under the door of my room in the middle of the night. It said simply, "You should have stayed hidden, Mrs. Hartley. Your testimony could still hang me. Make peace with your life because you don't have much time left." It wasn't signed, but I knew who sent it. Brennan had found me again, and this time he wasn't content to let me run. He was going to kill me. "So you disappeared again," I said. I had no choice. I couldn't go to the police. I still had no proof of Brennan's involvement in Thomas's death, and without proof, my accusations would be worthless. I couldn't stay at the Ashworth house because that would put Mrs. Ashworth and the children in danger. If Brennan was willing to kill me, he might hurt anyone I cared about to get to me. So I left. Came here to this cottage where I'd felt safe and happy during our summer holiday, hoping to hide just a little longer. But hiding isn't a solution, Holmes said firmly. Brennan will eventually find you here too. You need protection, and you need justice for your husband's murder. That requires bringing Brennan to justice, which means we need evidence connecting him to Thomas's death and the warehouse thefts. "I have evidence," Eleanor said quietly. She stood and went to a small trunk in the corner of the room, opened it, and withdrew a leather-bound journal. Thomas kept detailed records of the cargo discrepancies he discovered. He documented everything: dates, shipment numbers, values of missing goods, names of workers he suspected were involved. He was compiling this as evidence to present to the firm's owners, but he never got the chance. After he died, I found this journal hidden in our flat. I kept it all these years because it was all I had left of Thomas and his work, but I've been too afraid to use it. Holmes took the journal and examined it carefully. Page after page of meticulous notations, cargo manifests, calculations of missing inventory, notes about suspicious behaviors. And there, multiple times throughout the journal, the name Malcolm Brennan appeared, with notes indicating his involvement in authorizing false manifests and directing the theft operation. "This is exactly what we need," Holmes said with satisfaction. "This journal, combined with your testimony about the threatening messages and your husband's fears before his death, should be sufficient to reopen the investigation into Thomas Hartley's murder and issue an arrest warrant for Malcolm Brennan." "But Brennan will know I've gone to the police," Eleanor protested. "He'll flee again before they can arrest him." "Not if we're careful about how we proceed," Holmes replied. "Brennan thinks you're still hiding, still afraid, still unwilling to come forward. We'll use that assumption against him. With your permission, Miss Hartley, I'd like to set a trap, one that will draw Brennan out into the open, where the police can apprehend him." Over the following hours, Holmes explained his plan. Eleanor would remain hidden in the cottage, while Holmes returned to London and contacted Inspector Lestrade with the evidence from Thomas's journal. Lestrade would begin investigating discreetly, without revealing that Eleanor had been found or that new evidence had emerged. Meanwhile, Holmes would put out word through London's criminal networks that Eleanor Hartley was seeking passage out of England, desperate to flee the country permanently, and would be meeting a contact at the docks to arrange her escape. Brennan has informants who will report this information to him, Holmes explained. He'll believe you're finally running for good, leaving England and taking any potential testimony with you. But he can't allow that. If you escape to the continent, you could still come forward later. He'll come to the docks himself to ensure you never leave London alive. You're using me as bait, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite obvious fear. Only indirectly. You'll remain safely here in Alderworth while we stage the scene at the docks. I'll have someone pose as you from a distance, just enough to draw Brennan out. Once he's revealed himself and made clear his intent to harm Eleanor Hartley, the police will arrest him. Your testimony and Thomas's journal will provide the evidence needed to charge him with conspiracy, theft, and murder. Eleanor agreed to the plan, seeing no other way to end years of fear and hiding. Holmes and I returned to London immediately, taking Thomas Hartley's journal with us. Holmes met with Inspector Lestrade and presented the evidence, explaining the full scope of the warehouse theft conspiracy and Malcolm Brennan's role in Thomas Hartley's murder. This journal is damning, Lestrade said, reviewing the detailed records. If what Hartley documented is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it, Brennan orchestrated a major theft operation and killed a man to cover it up. Combined with Mrs. Hartley's testimony about the threats she received, we have enough for arrest and prosecution. But we need to actually capture Brennan. He's been evading us for 4 years. That's where the trap comes in. Holmes explained his plan to draw Brennan to the docks. Lestrade approved the operation and assembled a team of plainclothes officers to position around the designated dock area. Holmes arranged for one of his network of informants, a woman of approximately Eleanor's age and build, to pose as the fleeing governess. The woman would arrive at the docks at the specified time, apparently preparing to board a ship, providing the bait to lure Brennan into the open. Meanwhile, Holmes ensured that word of Eleanor's supposed flight reached the right ears. He visited several establishments known to be frequented by the types of informants who might have connections to Brennan's network, dropping carefully crafted hints about a governess desperate to leave England, seeking passage that very evening. The trap was set for 3 days later, giving time for the information to circulate and reach Brennan. The evening was cold and foggy, perfect conditions for concealment and apprehension. Holmes, Lestrade, and I positioned ourselves in a warehouse overlooking the designated dock, while plainclothes police officers scattered throughout the area, hidden but ready to move. At the appointed hour, the woman posing as Eleanor appeared at the dock, wearing a dark cloak and carrying a small travelling bag. She moved nervously, glancing around as if watching for pursuers, perfectly playing the role of someone desperate to escape. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The decoy waited at the dock, occasionally checking a pocket watch as if expecting a contact. The fog grew thicker, reducing visibility and increasing tension. Then Holmes stiffened beside me. "There," he whispered, pointing to a figure emerging from the fog near the dock entrance. A tall, thin man with dark hair greying at the temples, moving with predatory purpose toward the woman he believed to be Eleanor Hartley.
That's him, Lestrade confirmed quietly. Malcolm Brennan. We have photographs from the original investigation. Brennan approached the decoy slowly, his hand inside his coat, likely holding a weapon. He was perhaps 20 feet away when he called out, "Mrs. Hartley," leaving without saying goodbye. The decoy turned, saw Brennan, and began backing away, exactly as a frightened Eleanor would do. Brennan quickened his pace, closing the distance. "You should have stayed in."
"Edinburgh," Brennan said, his voice carrying clearly in the fog.
"You should never have come back to London. Did you really think I wouldn't find you again? You're the only person who can connect me to your husband's unfortunate accident. The only loose end that needs tying up. I've been very patient, Mrs. Hartley, allowing you to run and hide. But patience has limits." He drew a revolver from his coat. "This time, you won't be running anywhere." "Police, drop your weapon," Lestrade shouted, emerging from concealment along with a dozen officers who surrounded Brennan from all directions. Brennan froze, realizing he'd been trapped. He looked from the decoy, who had dropped her pretense and stepped back, to the officers closing in, to Holmes, who had descended from the warehouse and was approaching with that characteristic expression of satisfied intellectual triumph. "Malcolm Brennan," Holmes said clearly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to theft, for ordering the murder of Thomas
Hartley 4 years ago, and for attempted murder of Eleanor Hartley. Your admission just now was heard by 24 witnesses, including myself, Dr. Watson, and Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard." Brennan's face contorted with rage and realization. It was a trap. She's not even here. "No, Eleanor Hartley is quite safe, far from London and beyond your reach," Holmes confirmed. "But your own words have condemned you. You acknowledged responsibility for Thomas Hartley's death, referred to it as an unfortunate accident that you caused, and explicitly threatened to kill his widow to prevent her testimony. Combined with Thomas Hartley's journal documenting your theft conspiracy and Mrs. Hartley's testimony about the threats you've made over the years, we have more than sufficient evidence for prosecution." Brennan's expression shifted from rage to calculation. For a moment, he seemed to consider fighting or fleeing, but the number of officers surrounding him made resistance futile. He lowered his weapon slowly and allowed himself to be disarmed and arrested.
At the police station, Brennan initially refused to speak without a solicitor. But when confronted with Thomas Hartley's detailed journal entries, with Eleanor's testimony taken earlier that day by a magistrate in Sussex, and with the testimony of the witnesses who had heard his threatening admission at the docks, his resistance crumbled. "I never wanted to kill anyone," Brennan said bitterly during his confession. "The theft operation was just business, skimming valuable cargo, selling it privately, sharing the profits with a few warehouse workers. It should have been simple, profitable, and undetectable. But Thomas Hartley was too thorough, too honest. He noticed the discrepancies, started documenting everything, wouldn't accept bribes or threats to keep quiet. I had no choice. If he exposed the operation, I'd face prison. So I arranged the accident." "And Eleanor Hartley?" Lestrade prompted. "I didn't know if her husband had told her about his investigation. I couldn't take the chance. When I learned she'd taken a position as a governess and was using her married name, I went to warn her. Tell her to keep silent about anything her husband might have told her, or she'd share his fate. But she ran before I could even deliver the message. I spent 3 years tracking her, finally located her in Edinburgh, but before I could reach her again, she'd disappeared. When she returned to London 6 months ago, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let her testify, couldn't risk her coming forward with whatever her husband might have told her about the theft operation. So I sent the threatening note, hoping to frighten her into permanent silence or force her into the open, where I could eliminate the threat she represented. 4 years of hunting an innocent woman, Holmes said with disgust. Eleanor Hartley knew nothing of substance about your operations. Her husband protected her by not sharing details of his investigation. If you'd simply left her alone after Thomas's death, she would never have been a threat to you. But your paranoid determination to silence a potential witness drove you to attempted murder and guaranteed your eventual capture. Malcolm Brennan was tried and convicted on multiple charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas Hartley's journal, Eleanor's testimony, Brennan's own admission at the docks, testimony from former warehouse workers who confirmed Brennan's role in the theft conspiracy and provided details about how Thomas Hartley's accident had been staged. Brennan received a lengthy prison sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his productive years behind bars. With Brennan arrested and imprisoned, Eleanor Hartley was finally safe. Holmes arranged for her to meet with Mrs. Ashworth and the children at a neutral location, the same cottage in Alderworth where Eleanor had been hiding. The reunion was emotional. Emma and Thomas ran to Eleanor, embracing her with tears of relief and joy. Mrs. Ashworth, more reserved but equally relieved, thanked Eleanor for finally trusting someone enough to reveal the truth of her circumstances. "I should have told you from the beginning," Eleanor said to Mrs. Ashworth. "When I returned 6 months ago, I should have explained why I'd left the first time, should have been honest about the danger. But I was so afraid of dragging your family into my problems, of putting the children at risk because of my connection to a murdered man and a criminal conspiracy. I thought if I could just keep quiet and stay hidden, everyone would be safe. Instead, the secrecy and repeated disappearances created more pain for everyone," Mrs. Ashworth said gently. "But I understand why you felt you had no choice. You were protecting yourself and trying to protect us. Mr. Holmes has explained everything, and I don't blame you for the decisions you made under such terrible circumstances." "Can I come home?" Eleanor asked tentatively. "Can I return to my position with your family? I know I've broken trust twice by disappearing, and you have every reason to never want to see me again. But I love Emma and Thomas. I love being their governess, and now that the threat is gone, I hope I can prove myself worthy of that trust again." Mrs. Ashworth smiled. "The children would be heartbroken if you didn't return, and I need a governess I can depend on, which you've proven yourself to be, despite the extraordinary circumstances that forced you to leave. Come back to London with us, Eleanor. Come back home." The case of the governess who vanished twice entered my notes as one of Holmes's most emotionally satisfying investigations. It demonstrated that disappearances often have logical explanations rooted in fear danger and desperate attempts at self-preservation, rather than mysterious supernatural causes or incomprehensible motivations. The woman running for her life will vanish without
explanation, Holmes reflected after the case concluded. She can't risk leaving notes that might reveal her destination. Can't trust anyone with the truth, because that knowledge could put them in danger. Can't explain her departure, because explanation requires revealing the threat she faces. Eleanor Hartley's 2 disappearances seemed mysterious to those she left behind. But from her perspective, each vanishing was the only rational response to mortal danger. The case influenced subsequent police handling of missing persons cases, particularly those involving potential witnesses to serious crimes. Holmes worked with Scotland Yard to develop protocols for protecting witnesses who feared retaliation, providing safe houses and official protection so that witnesses wouldn't feel compelled to disappear and hide on their own. If Eleanor Hartley had felt she could safely come forward with her husband's journal and her testimony immediately after his death, she would never have needed to vanish in the first place, Holmes wrote in a monograph about witness protection. The failure was not in her response to danger, but in the absence of systems that could protect her from that danger, while ensuring justice for her husband's murder. Society has a responsibility to protect those who come forward with evidence against dangerous criminals, ensuring that seeking justice doesn't require sacrificing safety. Years later, Eleanor remained with the Ashworth family, becoming not just the children's governess, but a trusted friend to Mrs. Ashworth. She watched Emma and Thomas grow from children into young adults, guided their education, and took pride in their accomplishments. The children she had twice been forced to abandon became the family she never got to have with Thomas, and the home she had twice fled became the sanctuary where she finally found peace and safety. The governess who vanished twice never had to vanish again, Holmes said when I asked him about the case years later. Once the threat was eliminated, once Brennan was imprisoned and the danger removed, Eleanor could finally stop running. She could build a life, maintain relationships, become part of a family without fear that her presence would bring violence to those she cared about. That's what makes this case satisfying. Not just solving the mystery of the disappearances, but removing the cause of those disappearances so that the person at the center of the mystery could finally live in safety. I attended Emma Ashworth's wedding years later. She had grown into a capable, confident young woman, largely due to Eleanor Hartley's patient guidance and education. Eleanor was there as well, no longer the children's governess now that Emma and Thomas were adults, but still considered a member of the family. Miss Hartley saved my life twice, Emma told me at the reception. The first time was when she came to be my governess when I was 6. She gave me stability and love when I desperately needed it after my father's death. The second time was when she chose to leave rather than expose our family to the danger she faced. She could have told my mother about Brennan, could have asked for help or protection, but she knew that knowledge would put us at risk. So she sacrificed her own happiness and safety to protect ours. That's the kind of person she is, selfless, devoted, and impossibly brave even when she didn't feel brave at all. The case remained one of my favorite investigations to recall because it showed that the most mysterious disappearances can be acts of love and protection rather than abandonment or betrayal.
Eleanor Hartley vanished twice, not because she was flighty or unreliable, not because she didn't care about the family she served, but precisely because she cared so much that she couldn't bear the thought of bringing danger to their doorstep. 2 disappearances, 1 cause, Holmes summarized years later. The same threat that forced her to flee the first time resurfaced to force her to flee again. But the pattern itself, the repetition, was actually the clue that helped solve the case. A single disappearance might have any number of explanations, but 2 identical disappearances under similar circumstances suggested an external threat that recurred periodically, a danger that ebbed and flowed but never fully disappeared until actively eliminated. The torn photograph and the hair ribbon that Eleanor left behind during her second disappearance proved to be exactly what Holmes had deduced: deliberate communication disguised as mysterious tokens. The torn photograph separated Eleanor from the children, representing her necessary departure to keep them safe. The blue ribbon from Emma's hair indicated Eleanor's destination, pointing toward the Sussex cottage and the village that shared Emma's favourite colour. She was saying goodbye and leaving a trail simultaneously, Holmes explained. Goodbye to the children she couldn't protect if she stayed, and a trail for anyone clever enough to follow it if help was needed. It was a desperate message from a desperate woman, but it was also brilliantly crafted, specific enough for someone like me to interpret, but vague enough that Brennan would never understand, even if he found the items. Thomas Hartley's journal, preserved for 4 years by his widow as a memorial and as evidence, finally served the purpose he had intended, exposing the warehouse theft conspiracy and ensuring justice for those harmed by it. The journal entries showed a methodical, honest man who couldn't ignore corruption, even when doing so would have kept him safe. His determination to document the truth cost him his life, but ultimately led to the conviction of those responsible for his death. Eleanor kept that journal through 4 years of running and hiding, I observed. She could have destroyed it. It made her a target, since Brennan feared what evidence might be in it. But she kept it because it was Thomas's work, because it represented his integrity and his final effort to do what was right. In the end, that journal did exactly what Thomas intended. It exposed the criminals and brought them to justice. Just 4 years too late to save his own life. That's the tragedy of the case, Holmes agreed. If Thomas Hartley had come forward with his evidence sooner, before the conspirators knew he was investigating them, he might have survived. If he'd gone to the police immediately upon discovering the first discrepancies, he would have been under their protection. But he wanted to be thorough, wanted to document everything perfectly before making accusations. That thoroughness gave the conspirators time to realize he was a threat and to eliminate him. So what should he have done differently? I asked. Nothing, Holmes said firmly. Thomas Hartley's approach was correct. Methodical investigation, careful documentation, thorough evidence gathering. The fault lies not with him, but with the criminals who murdered him for discovering their crimes. We cannot ask victims to do less than their duty simply because criminals might hurt them for doing what's right. Instead, we must ensure better protection for those who come forward with evidence, faster response to reports of corruption, and harsher penalties for those who would silence witnesses through violence. The case of the governess who vanished twice demonstrated once again that human behaviour, however mysterious it might appear,
usually has comprehensible motivations rooted in rational responses to circumstances. Eleanor Hartley didn't vanish twice because of some inexplicable character flaw or supernatural compulsion. She vanished because she was hunted by a murderer determined to silence the last potential witness to his crimes. And vanishing was the only survival strategy available to someone without official protection or sufficient resources to fight back. Every mystery has an explanation,
Holmes said, his most fundamental principle of detective work. When faced with apparent impossibility, a woman who vanishes twice under identical circumstances, leaving behind loved ones and the good position both times, the detective must look beyond the surface mystery to the underlying logic. Eleanor's disappearances seemed random and incomprehensible to those around her because they didn't know about the threat she faced. Once we understood that threat, the disappearances made perfect sense as rational self-preservation. The governess who vanished twice finally found stability, safety, and a permanent home. The children she protected by leaving were protected even more completely by her eventual return. The husband she lost was avenged by the journal he left behind, and the wife who preserved it through years of danger. And the threat that had forced her into 4 years of running, hiding, and repeated vanishing was finally eliminated, allowing her to live openly and safely for the first time since Thomas Hartley's death.
Years after the case, I asked Eleanor if she regretted the years she spent hiding, the time she lost running from Malcolm Brennan's threat.
I regret that Thomas died, she said thoughtfully. I regret that a good man was murdered for doing what was right. I regret the years I spent afraid, looking over my shoulder, unable to build a normal life. But I don't regret the survival choices I made. Vanishing twice saved my life twice. Each time I disappeared, I stayed alive long enough to eventually find safety. That's not failure. That's success under terrible circumstances. And in the end, Thomas's evidence brought his killers to justice. I survived to testify, and the children I love became the family I thought I'd lost forever. Given the terrible situation I was in, that's the best possible outcome. The case closed with all mysteries explained, all questions answered, and all parties finding resolution appropriate to their circumstances. Malcolm Brennan faced justice for his crimes. Eleanor Hartley found safety and stability. The Ashworth family had their beloved governess permanently returned, and the memory of Thomas Hartley was honoured both by the journal that exposed corruption and by the wife who preserved his work until it could serve its intended purpose. The governess who vanished twice never had to vanish again, and that, in the end, was the true success of Holmes's investigation. Not just solving the mystery of why she disappeared, but ensuring she would never need to disappear again.